I never imagined that a 4-year-old's stubborn demand would completely transform my life. Standing outside the towering glass doors of Sterling Corp., I adjusted my tie for the third time, my hands trembling so badly I wondered if anyone passing by could notice. My heart hammered against my ribcage like it was trying to escape, each beat echoing the anxiety flooding through my veins. This was it, the biggest tech company in the city, and I was here to interview for a junior assistant position. I needed this job desperately. College loans were suffocating me, rent was due in a week, and every financial burden seemed to press down harder on my shoulders with each passing day. But before I even stepped through those intimidating doors, the warnings from friends had already planted seeds of doubt in my mind. Skyler Renee is a machine, not a human being. My roommate had told me the night before, his voice carrying an ominous weight. The man doesn't understand emotions. His eyes only see targets and numbers, never people. I've heard he fired someone for smiling during a presentation. I had convinced myself that people were probably exaggerating, building up urban legends about a demanding boss. But the moment I walked into that conference room and laid eyes on the man himself, every warning suddenly made perfect sense. He stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, hands buried deep in the pockets of an impeccably tailored black suit that looked like it cost more than my entire year's salary. His height was intimidating, his posture radiating authority and control. The sharp angles of his jawline could have been carved from marble by a master sculptor. Everything about him screamed perfection, untouchable, unreachable perfection. But when he turned those eyes on me, I understood immediately why people called him Heartless. There was no warmth in that gaze. Only ice. Only distance. He looked at me the way someone might examine a document before deciding whether to file it or shred it. Sit. One word. No introduction. No greeting, no acknowledgement of basic human courtesy. I lowered myself into the chair across from his massive desk, carefully placing my resume on the polished surface between us. He didn't even glance at it. His attention remained fixed entirely on me, studying me with an intensity that made me feel like a specimen under a microscope. Why should I hire you? The question came out blunt and direct, cutting through any pretense. I started reciting the answer I had rehearsed a dozen times in front of my bathroom mirror, but he interrupted before I could finish my second sentence. I didn't ask for a rehearsed script. I asked why you specifically deserve this position. My mind went completely blank. All those carefully prepared responses evaporated like morning mist under harsh sunlight. I took a deep breath, deciding that honesty might be my only real weapon here. Because I need this job more than anything right now. When you desperately need something, you give it everything you have. I'm not claiming to be perfect or the most qualified candidate who walked through your door. But I'm willing to learn, adapt, and work harder than anyone else. Maybe that counts for something. The silence that followed felt like it lasted an eternity. He narrowed his eyes as if trying to see straight through to my soul, weighing the truth of my words against some internal scale only he understood. Then, without any change in his expression, he said, "You start Monday." I blinked, certain I had misheard. Wait, I'm hired? Just like that? Did I stutter? For the first time, a slight edge crept into his cold tone, though his face remained an emotionless mask. Relief and disbelief crashed over me in equal waves. But the moment didn't last long. The door suddenly burst open and a small tornado of energy came barreling into the room. A little boy with wild black curls bouncing around his face and the biggest blue eyes I had ever seen ran straight toward Skyler and latched onto his leg with fierce determination. "Papa, Papa!" That boring teacher came back again. "I don't want her anymore." My jaw dropped. Papa? Skyler Renee had a son? This cold, emotionless corporate machine was someone's father? Skyler looked down at the child, his expression not changing even a fraction. "Ken, I'm in the middle of a meeting, but I don't care about your meeting." The boy's voice carried the pure, unfiltered honesty that only children possess. Then his attention suddenly shifted to me, and he went completely still, staring at me like I was some fascinating alien creature. His small finger pointed directly at my chest. "Papa? Who is this person?" "Someone who works here," Skyler replied in that same flat, emotionless tone that seemed to be his default setting. Before I could process what was happening, Ken had grabbed my hand. his grip surprisingly strong for someone so small, and was pulling me toward him with surprising force. "What's your name?" I'm Jamie." I managed to stammer, completely thrown off balance by this unexpected turn of events. Ken's eyes lit up like someone had just turned on a spotlight behind them. "Jamie, you have a nice voice. It sounds soft and kind. Will you read me a story?" My heart did a strange flip in my chest. "A story? Yes. Papa never reads stories to me. He only looks at his computer screen all day long. And the teacher he hired for me is so boring that I fall asleep before the story even gets interesting. But your voice sounds different. I like it." I glanced desperately at Skyler, silently begging for some kind of guidance or rescue from this situation. But he just stood there like a statue, completely emotionless, as if his son's request had nothing whatsoever to do with him. Ken squeezed my hand tighter and his voice dropped to a pleading whisper. "Please? Just one story?" There was so much hope packed into that single word, so much innocent trust, that I felt something crack open inside my chest. "Okay," I heard myself say softly, unable to resist that vulnerable plea. "I can read you a story." Ken jumped with pure joy, his whole body expressing the happiness that his father never seemed to feel. But when I looked back at Skyler, something had shifted in his eyes. Something subtle but unmistakable. Something almost protective. "Ken, go back to your room immediately," Skyler commanded, his voice carrying a note of authority. "No, I want Jamie to stay with me," Ken insisted, pulling me closer to him as if I might disappear if he let go. In that tense, charged moment of silence, I suddenly understood that I had stumbled into something far more complicated than a simple job interview. Ken's desperate demand, Skyler's cold yet somehow conflicted gaze, and me caught directly in the middle. A game whose rules I didn't understand and couldn't predict. Whatever was happening here, whatever strange dynamic existed between this father and son, I had just become an unwitting player in their story. And somehow I knew that nothing would ever be quite the same again. I had absolutely no choice in what happened next. Monday morning arrived far too quickly, and when I walked into Sterling Corp as an official employee, the receptionist directed me not to the general assistant floor but straight to the private executive level. This was where only the top company leaders had access, where decisions worth millions were made behind closed doors. Apparently, I now had clearance to enter this exclusive space. But this wasn't an honor or a privilege. It was a trap. Skyler summoned me to his office before I even had a chance to find my actual desk. When I entered, he sat behind his massive workspace, eyes fixed on his laptop screen with laser focus. Without looking up or acknowledging my presence in any meaningful way, he stated, "You'll spend 2 hours with Ken every evening. After your regular work shift ends." I must have looked as confused as I felt. "I'm sorry, what exactly are you asking me to do?" Now he looked up, giving me that same emotionless stare that seemed to be his only expression. "Ken doesn't listen to anyone. Teachers quit after a week. Nannies last maybe a month. But yesterday he listened to you. So you'll handle him." "Sir, with all due respect, I applied to be your assistant, not a babysitter." "Then quit." "1 second. That's all the time he gave me to make a life-altering decision." Then his attention returned to his screen as if the conversation had already concluded and my presence no longer mattered. I stood there, frozen, feeling anger and helplessness swirl together in my chest like a toxic mixture. I desperately needed this job. The salary was more than I could find anywhere else. And Skyler clearly knew he had me cornered. "Fine," I said through clenched teeth, forcing the word out. "I'll do it." "Good. He's waiting for you in the executive lounge." And just like that, I had been transformed from a corporate assistant into a storyteller for a lonely child. When I found the lounge, Ken was already there, sitting on an oversized leather couch, with his legs swinging freely, not quite reaching the floor. A large storybook lay open in his lap, and the moment he spotted me, his entire face transformed into pure sunshine. "Jamie, you came back!" He waved his small hands enthusiastically, bouncing slightly on the cushions. I walked over and sat down beside him, still processing how my career plans had been completely derailed. "Yeah, I came back." He immediately pushed the book toward me, his finger pointing at the colorful cover. "Read this one. It's my absolute favorite in the whole world." I examined the title, The Lost Prince, a classic fairy tale I vaguely remembered from my own childhood. All right, I agreed, opening to the first page. But before I could begin reading, Ken's small hand covered mine, stopping me. Wait, he said seriously, his young face suddenly thoughtful. Will you read stories to Papa too? The question caught me completely off guard. What do you mean? Papa never listens to stories anymore. He just works and never stops. If you read to him too, maybe he would remember how to be happy. Maybe he would smile again. Something painful twisted inside my chest. This little boy carried so much sadness behind those bright eyes. But I knew better than to think someone like Skyler would ever take time for something as simple as a bedtime story. Ken, your father is extremely busy running this entire company. No, Ken interrupted stubbornly, his voice taking on a determined edge. I want him to listen too. Please? Please ask him. Before I could respond, the door opened and Skyler walked in, his presence immediately filling the entire room. He glanced at Ken, then at me. Is there a problem here? Ken jumped to his feet instantly. Papa, Jamie is going to read us a story. You have to sit down and listen too. Skyler hesitated for just a fraction of a second. He checked his expensive watch, clearly calculating whether he could spare any time. I have a conference call in 15 minutes. Papa, please. Ken grabbed onto his father's suit jacket with both hands, his voice breaking slightly. Just 10 minutes. That's all I'm asking for. Please? I watched Skyler's jaw tighten, saw the internal struggle playing across his otherwise controlled features. He wanted to refuse. Every line of his body language screamed that he had more important things to do. But when he looked down at his son's pleading face, something shifted. 10 minutes, he finally conceded, lowering himself onto the couch, keeping a deliberate distance from me, yet somehow still uncomfortably close. I swallowed hard and opened the book, my hands slightly unsteady. My voice shook at first, uncertain and awkward under the weight of Skyler's presence. But as I continued reading, bringing different characters to life with varied tones and expressions, I found myself relaxing into the rhythm of the story. Ken became completely absorbed, giggling at the funny voices I created, gasping at the dramatic moments, his entire being focused on the tale unfolding before him. And once, just once, when I dared to glance sideways, I saw something impossible. Skyler was listening. His expression remained carefully neutral, that mask of control firmly in place. But his eyes had softened ever so slightly as he watched his son's joy. They flickered to me for just a split second, and I caught something there, curiosity maybe, or perhaps confusion about what he was feeling. When the story reached its happy ending, Ken clapped his hands together enthusiastically. That was amazing. Jamie, you're the best storyteller ever. I smiled despite myself. Thank you, Ken. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Skyler stood abruptly. Time's up. Ken, return to your room now. Ken's face fell into a pout, but he didn't argue. He gave me one last bright smile before running out, leaving me alone with his father. I started to stand, ready to escape this awkward situation, but Skyler's voice stopped me cold. Wait. I froze halfway out of my seat. He moved closer, much closer than necessary for any professional conversation. His height created a shadow that fell across me, and I suddenly became very aware of how much space he occupied, how his presence seemed to fill every available inch of air. Don't get attached, he said quietly, his voice low and carrying an unmistakable warning. It wasn't threatening, exactly, but it definitely wasn't friendly either. Not to him, not to this situation. I forced myself to meet his eyes, to hold that intense gaze even though every instinct told me to look away. There was something hidden there, buried beneath all that ice. Something painful and carefully guarded. I won't, I lied, knowing even as I said the words that they weren't true. Because how could anyone not get attached to a child like Ken? And maybe, just maybe, I was already starting to see cracks in Skyler's armor too. 2 weeks passed in a strange new routine. Every evening, I found myself in that executive lounge, reading stories to Ken while Skyler hovered somewhere nearby. Sometimes standing just outside the door, sometimes actually entering the room, but always maintaining that careful distance. Yet I could feel his presence constantly, like a magnetic pull I couldn't quite ignore. During those 2 weeks I learned so much about Ken that it made my heart ache. He was profoundly lonely in a way that no child should ever be. His mother wasn't in the picture. Whether she had passed away or simply left, Ken never mentioned, and I didn't have the courage to ask. All he had was Skyler, and all Skyler seemed to have was his work. One afternoon, while I was reading a particularly emotional passage about a lost kingdom, Ken suddenly interrupted me. "Jamie, what's your mother like?" The question hit me unexpectedly, like stepping on a bruise I'd forgotten existed. She's okay. She lives far away now. Does she love you?" My throat tightened. "Yes. Very much." Ken shifted closer to me, resting his small head against my shoulder in a gesture of such trust and vulnerability that I had to blink back unexpected moisture in my eyes. "I don't remember my mother at all. Papa says she's gone and won't come back. But sometimes I wonder if she were still here, would she read me stories? Would she tuck me in at night and kiss my forehead like the mothers in books do?" I gently stroked his hair, searching for words that might comfort him. "I'm absolutely certain she would have. Your mother must have loved you tremendously." "How can you possibly know that?" "Because you're such a good person, Ken. And good people are created through love. Someone loved you enough to make you this kind and sweet." He wrapped his small arms around me in a tight hug, and in that moment I realized this had stopped being just a job. It had become something much more significant and dangerous to my heart. Later that week, as I was preparing to leave for the evening, Skyler intercepted me in the corridor outside his office. "Ken's asleep," I reported, assuming he was checking on the situation. He nodded but didn't move aside to let me pass. He simply stood there blocking my path, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. "Can I help you with something, sir?" I asked cautiously. Uncomfortable under his scrutiny, he continued staring at me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. For the first time since we'd met, he seemed to really see me, not as an employee or a convenient solution to his childcare problem, but as an actual person. "You're remarkably good with him." "Thank you," I replied awkwardly, unsure where this conversation was heading. "Why? Why what exactly? Why do you care about my son?" He adjusted his tone, and suddenly it wasn't demanding or cold. It was genuinely confused, as if the concept of someone caring without obligation was completely foreign to him. "You're compensated to assist me professionally. Nobody's paying you to develop genuine affection for Ken." I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully, because Ken deserves to have someone care about him. He deserves attention and warmth, and someone who makes him feel valued. And maybe you've been so consumed by running this company that you haven't noticed how much he needs that. Skyler's jaw tightened visibly, and for a terrifying moment I thought I had pushed too far, crossed some invisible line that would get me fired immediately. But he didn't speak. He just continued watching me with those unreadable eyes. Finally he said, "You don't know anything about me or my life." "I know enough," I countered quietly, surprised by my own boldness. "I know you love your son deeply, but I also know you've forgotten how to show it. Or maybe you never learned in the first place." Silence fell between us like a heavy curtain. Then Skyler took one step forward, closing the distance between us to an almost unbearable degree. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could smell his cologne, a mixture of wood and musk that was simultaneously overwhelming and intoxicating. My heart began racing for reasons I didn't want to examine too closely. "Careful, Jamie," he whispered, his voice dropping to a dangerously low register. "You're crossing boundaries you don't fully understand." My pulse hammered in my ears. "I'm only speaking the truth." "And the truth," he said, his eyes flickering down to my lips for just a fraction of a second before returning to meet my gaze, "can be incredibly dangerous in the wrong circumstances." Then he stepped back abruptly, breaking whatever spell had formed between us, and walked away without another word. He left me standing alone in that corridor, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I couldn't quite control, because in that single charged moment, I had felt something shift in the air between us. Something had changed in a fundamental way that I couldn't take back or pretend hadn't happened. Skyler Renee wasn't just a cold, heartless CEO anymore. He was a man complex, wounded, struggling with emotions he clearly didn't know how to process. And I was starting to see past the armor he'd built around himself, glimpsing the vulnerable person hiding underneath all that ice. The realization terrified me. I was becoming attached to Ken, which was dangerous enough on its own. But somehow, impossibly, I was also becoming fascinated by Skyler himself. By the way his expression softened ever so slightly when he watched his son, by the rare moments when his careful control slipped just enough for me to see the pain he carried, by the glimpses of the man he might have been before life had taught him to build walls around his heart. This was more than dangerous. This was potentially devastating, because people like me, ordinary, replaceable, forgettable people, didn't get involved with people like Skyler Renee. That wasn't how the world worked. There were unspoken rules, invisible barriers that separated his world from mine. Yet somehow, those barriers were beginning to blur, and I had no idea what would happen when they finally disappeared completely. I never believed that someone like Skyler Renee could actually have a heart beating beneath all that ice. But that night changed everything I thought I knew about him. It was well past midnight when I returned to the office, cursing myself for forgetting my laptop. The building felt different after hours. Emptier, quieter, almost haunted by the absence of its usual bustling energy. Most of the floors were completely dark, but as I approached the executive level, I noticed a faint light spilling from Skyler's office. I should have just grabbed my laptop and left. Should have minded my own business and gone home to my tiny apartment. But something made me pause, made me look through the partially open door. Skyler sat at his desk in the dimness, a single lamp casting long shadows across his face. His hands covered his eyes, his shoulders slumped forward in a posture of complete defeat. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked utterly human, vulnerable and broken in a way that made my chest tighten with unexpected emotion. I was about to turn away, to give him privacy in this rare moment of weakness, when I heard something that stopped me cold. Crying. A child crying. My feet moved before my brain could catch up, carrying me toward the executive lounge where the sound originated. I pushed open the door to find Ken curled into a tight ball on the couch, his small body shaking with sobs that seemed too big for someone so little. Ken. I rushed to his side, immediately sitting down and reaching for him. What happened? What's wrong? He looked up at me with red, swollen eyes, his face streaked with tears that kept falling no matter how hard he tried to wipe them away. Jamie, I had the worst dream, the scariest dream ever. I pulled him into my arms without hesitation, feeling his small form trembling against my chest. Tell me about it. Sometimes talking about nightmares makes them less frightening. His voice came out broken and small. I dreamed about my mother. She was walking away from me, getting smaller and smaller until she disappeared. And then Papa started walking away too, following her into the darkness. I tried to run after them, tried to scream for them to come back, but no sound came out. They just kept going until I was completely alone in the empty darkness. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. I stroked his hair gently, searching desperately for words that might comfort him. Ken, listen to me carefully. Your father would never abandon you. He loves you more than anything in this entire world. No. Ken's voice rose to a shout, raw with pain. He doesn't love me at all. He never talks to me. He's always locked in meetings or staring at his computer. If he loved me, he would want to spend time with me. Ken, that's not true. It's my fault. The new voice made my breath catch. That voice. Skyler's voice, but different, tracked and rough with emotion I'd never heard from him before. I turned to see him standing in the doorway, half his face hidden in shadows, but I could still see the raw pain written across his features, the way his entire body seemed to carry an unbearable weight. Papa! Ken whispered, his voice suddenly small and uncertain. Skyler moved forward slowly, each step deliberate, until he reached us. Then he did something I never expected. He dropped to his knees on the floor in front of his son, bringing himself to Ken's eye level. Ken, he began, and his voice cracked halfway through the name. None of this is your fault. Not a single bit of it. The fault lies entirely with me. Ken went completely still, his tear-filled eyes fixed on his father's face. I don't know how to show you properly, Skyler continued, and I watched in stunned silence as tears began forming in his eyes. Actual tears sliding down the face of a man. Everyone called Heartless. I love you more than life itself. You are everything to me, everything that matters. But when your mother left us, when she walked out that door and never came back, something inside me broke. I made myself a promise that day. I swore I would never let anyone hurt you the way her leaving hurt both of us. So I built walls around us, thinking that work and success and money could protect you from pain. But all I did was hurt you in a different way. I became so obsessed with providing for you financially that I forgot to provide what you actually needed: my time, my attention, my presence. Ken's bottom lip trembled. Papa? Skyler gathered his son into his arms, holding him with a fierceness that spoke of years of suppressed emotion finally breaking free. I'm so sorry, son. I've been a terrible father, and you deserved so much better. But I'm going to change. I swear on everything I am that I'm going to become the father you deserve. I promise you that. Ken wrapped his small arms around Skyler's neck and held on like he was afraid to ever let go. I stood there feeling like an intruder in an intensely private moment, witnessing something sacred and raw that I had no right to see. But when Skyler lifted his gaze to meet mine over Ken's shoulder, still holding his son close, I saw something in his expression that made my pulse quicken. Gratitude, yes, but also something deeper, something more complicated that I couldn't quite name. Thank you, he mouthed silently. The words meant only for me. I could only manage a small nod, too overwhelmed by emotion to trust my voice. Everything shifted after that night. Skyler began carving time out of his impossible schedule. He started having dinner with Ken every evening, not just eating in the same room but actually engaging in conversation, asking about his day, listening to his stories. He played games with his son, got down on the floor to build block towers, laughed at Ken's jokes even when they didn't quite make sense. And when I read stories each evening, Skyler would settle onto the couch right beside us, not maintaining that careful distance anymore, but sitting close enough that our shoulders sometimes brushed, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. One evening after I finished a particularly long tale, I glanced over to find Ken fast asleep, his head resting peacefully against the cushions. I carefully tucked a soft blanket around him and started to stand, thinking I should leave father and son alone. Stay. Skyler's voice was quiet but firm. I froze halfway to my feet. Sir, just stay. For a few minutes. Please. I lowered myself back down, and we sat together in comfortable silence, both watching Ken sleep with matching expressions of tenderness. You've changed him completely, Skyler said softly, keeping his voice low so as not to wake his son. He smiles constantly now. He talks about you all the time. You've brought joy back into his life. My heart hammered against my ribs. I haven't done anything special. You've done everything that matters, Skyler interrupted, turning to face me fully. The coldness that had always inhabited his eyes was completely gone, replaced by genuine warmth that made him look like an entirely different person. You reminded me that I'm not just a CEO, not just a businessman. I'm a father first. I'm Ken's father, and that should always be my most important role. I swallowed hard. You were always his father. You just got a little lost along the way. But you found your way back. Skyler's lips curved into a smile. A real, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. It was the first time I'd ever seen him smile, and the sight literally stole my breath away. Thank you, Jamie, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, for everything. And in that quiet moment, with Ken sleeping peacefully beside us and Skyler looking at me like I had given him something precious beyond measure, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just attached to Ken anymore. I had developed feelings for Skyler too deep, complicated, dangerous feelings that could destroy everything. And that realization scared me more than anything else in my entire life. I tried reasoning with myself constantly, repeating the same arguments like a mantra. This is just employment. These aren't genuine feelings. It's simply gratitude for having a stable job. Nothing more, but the heart doesn't follow logic or reason. Every night when Skyler sat beside me during story time, whenever he laughed at something Ken said, each time he looked at me with those softened eyes and offered that small smile he'd started showing, I felt myself sinking deeper into something I couldn't control. And I knew it was completely wrong. One evening after Ken had drifted off to sleep during a particularly soothing story about sailing ships and distant shores, I quietly began to rise from my spot on the couch. But Skyler's hand suddenly wrapped around my wrist, stopping me mid-movement. Jamie. Wait, I froze, my heart immediately racing from the unexpected contact. His touch felt warm against my skin, sending electricity shooting up my arm. "I need to discuss something with you," he said, but there was unusual hesitation in his tone. Uncertainty that seemed foreign coming from someone usually so decisive. I slowly sat back down, my hands beginning to shake slightly. "Yes," he studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dim lighting. Then he released a heavy sigh. "This entire arrangement we have, it's becoming increasingly complicated." My stomach dropped like a stone. "Do you want me to leave? Stop coming here?" "No." The word came out quickly, almost desperately. "No, that's not what I meant at all." He paused, running his fingers through his hair in a gesture of pure frustration that made him look younger, more vulnerable. I don't even know how to articulate what I'm trying to say. I remained silent, afraid that speaking might shatter whatever fragile moment we were balanced on. "Ken has grown deeply attached to you," Skyler finally said, his voice careful and measured. "And I worry constantly about what happens when circumstances change. When you eventually decide to move on to better opportunities, I don't want him to experience that kind of loss again." "I would never hurt Ken," I said quietly, feeling defensive. "And who said anything about me leaving?" Skyler met my eyes directly. "You will eventually. Everyone does. People always leave in the end." The pain in those words was so profound that it made my chest ache. "Skyler." I stopped myself immediately. "I'm sorry. I meant so." "Don't." He cut me off sharply. "Don't call me that right now. Not in this moment." We both understood that something significant was happening, that professional boundaries were rapidly dissolving between us. "I don't want to leave," I whispered, barely able to get the words out. "I want to stay here, for Ken's sake." And I hesitated, but Skyler's intense gaze seemed to pull the truth from somewhere deep inside me. "And for your sake too." The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken possibilities. Then Skyler leaned toward me, closer, and even closer still. My breathing stopped entirely. "Jamie," he whispered, his lips now so near my ear that I could feel his warm breath against my skin. "You don't fully understand what you're suggesting." "I understand completely," I managed to say, though my voice shook with the intensity of what I was feeling. "I know exactly what I'm saying." Skyler's hand came up to cup my cheek, his touch so incredibly gentle that I couldn't reconcile it with the cold, harsh man everyone had warned me about. "If we cross this boundary," he said slowly, his thumb brushing lightly across my cheekbone, "there won't be any possibility of returning to how things were before." "Then I don't want to go back," I whispered. And then he kissed me. The kiss was soft at first, tentative and questioning, as if he was giving me every opportunity to pull away. But I didn't pull away. Instead, I leaned into him, my hands finding their way to his shirt and gripping the fabric tightly, anchoring myself to him as the kiss deepened. It was slow and careful but carried an undercurrent of desperation, like we were both drowning and only this connection could save us. When we finally broke apart, both of us were breathing hard, our foreheads resting against each other as we tried to process what had just happened. "This is completely inappropriate," Skyler said, but he didn't move away, didn't let go of me. "I know," I agreed, "but it doesn't feel wrong. It feels like the most right thing that's happened in a long time." Skyler let out a laugh that sounded almost painful. "You're going to be my undoing, Jamie. You're going to completely destroy the carefully constructed life I've built." "Then let me," I said simply. "Let me tear down those walls you've been hiding behind." And that night, everything between us fundamentally changed in ways that could never be undone. The following days passed in a blur of stolen moments and secret connections. Skyler and I would meet late at night after Ken was sleeping. We'd share quiet conversations in darkened hallways, exchange meaningful glances across meeting rooms, steal brief kisses when no one was watching. But we both knew this couldn't continue indefinitely. The rumors started circulating through the office like wildfire. Whispers in break rooms, meaningful looks from other employees, gossip spreading through email chains and water cooler conversations. "The CEO and his assistant are involved in something inappropriate." I heard the rumors. Skyler heard them too. And one afternoon, he summoned me to his office with an expression that told me everything was about to come crashing down. "People are talking," he said, pacing back and forth behind his desk like a caged animal. The rumors are spreading rapidly. If this continues, it's going to impact Ken's life. It's going to damage your reputation and career. I don't care what people think, I said stubbornly, crossing my arms. Well, I care, Skyler suddenly shouted, the first time I'd ever heard him truly raise his voice. He immediately stopped pacing, seeming shocked by his own outburst. Jamie, I can't allow you to suffer negative consequences because of your association with me. I'm already suffering, I said, feeling tears beginning to burn behind my eyes. Because I know you're about to push me away. I can see it happening right now. Skyler said nothing, and his silence confirmed my worst fears. Am I wrong? I challenged him. Tell me I'm wrong. He still didn't speak, and that silence said everything his words couldn't. I grabbed my bag from the chair. Fine. I'll make this easy for you. I'll leave. Jamie. No, I interrupted, refusing to let him see how much this was breaking my heart. You're right, this situation is too complicated. Ken could get hurt, and I refuse to be responsible for causing him any more pain. I moved toward the door, but Skyler was suddenly there, catching my arm and spinning me around. Before I could react, he had pressed me against the wall and was kissing me rough, desperate, heartbroken, like he was trying to pour every unsaid emotion into that single contact. When he pulled back, there were actual tears streaming down his face. I love you, Skyler whispered, his voice raw with emotion. God help me, but I've fallen completely in love with you. My breath caught in my throat. Skyler, but I can't be selfish about this, he continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. Not when Ken's well-being is at stake. Not when your future could be compromised. Then don't be selfish, I said through my own tears. Let me make this choice. Let me choose you, both of you. Let me decide that you're worth any challenge we might face. Skyler cupped my face in both his hands, his eyes searching mine desperately. Are you absolutely certain? Because once we acknowledge this publicly, there's no hiding anymore. No running from the consequences. I nodded firmly. I've never been more certain of anything in my entire life. 1 week later, Skyler reached for my hand at a public company event. It was the quarterly shareholders meeting, held in the grand ballroom of the city's most prestigious hotel. Hundreds of people filled the space: investors, board members, journalists, photographers. Every important figure in the business world seemed to be present. I had been standing off to the side, trying to remain invisible among the corporate elite, when Skyler finished his prepared speech about quarterly earnings and company projections. Instead of immediately leaving the podium as everyone expected, he scanned the crowd until his eyes found mine. Then he extended his hand toward me, a clear invitation. My heart stopped. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not now, not in front of all these people who could make or break his reputation with a single headline. But Skyler's expression was steady, determined, showing no hesitation whatsoever. I walked forward, feeling every eye in the room tracking my movement. The silence was deafening. When I reached him, he took my hand firmly in his grip warm and reassuring. I have one more announcement to make before we conclude today's proceedings, Skyler said, his voice carrying clearly through the microphone to every corner of the massive room. This is Jamie. He has become extraordinarily important to both me and my son. He's brought light and happiness back into our lives when we didn't even realize we'd been living in darkness. And I want everyone here to understand that I don't care one bit what anyone thinks about our relationship. The room erupted. Camera flashes exploded like lightning. Voices rose in shocked exclamations. I could see board members leaning together, whispering urgently. Journalists frantically typed on their phones, racing to be the first to break the story. But through all the chaos, I was only aware of two things. Skyler's hand holding mine with unwavering strength, and Ken standing in the front row with his nanny, absolutely beaming with joy, clapping his small hands together enthusiastically like he'd just witnessed the best moment of his entire young life. The aftermath was predictably tumultuous. Headlines screamed across every business publication and gossip website. Some were supportive, praising Skyler's courage. Others were vicious, questioning his judgment and fitness to lead a major corporation. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. Several conservative investors threatened to pull their funding. Social media exploded with opinions from people who had never met us and never would. But through all of it, Skyler never wavered. He stood firm, refusing to apologize or hide. He attended every meeting with his head held high, defended our relationship with unwavering conviction, and made it abundantly clear that anyone uncomfortable with his personal life was welcome to take their business elsewhere. Surprisingly, most chose to stay, because at the end of the day, Skyler was too valuable, too successful, too brilliant at what he did for them to walk away over something that didn't actually affect company performance. And gradually, slowly, the storm began to settle. 6 months passed. Life developed a new rhythm, different from before but somehow infinitely better. Skyler and I were together openly now, eating breakfast as a family, attending Ken's school events together, spending weekends at the park or the beach instead of trapped in offices and conference rooms. Ken had started calling me Jamie Dad, which made my heart swell every single time I heard it. He seemed happier than I'd ever seen him, secure in the knowledge that he had 2 people who loved him unconditionally. One quiet Sunday evening, after Ken had finally surrendered to sleep following an exhausting day at the zoo, Skyler and I sat together on the couch in comfortable silence. His arm was wrapped around my shoulders, and I was tucked against his side, feeling completely content. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked softly, the question that had been lingering in the back of my mind for weeks finally emerging. The announcement, the publicity, everything that came after. Skyler was quiet for a moment, and I felt him press a gentle kiss to the top of my head. "Not even for a second. The only thing I regret is all the time I wasted before you came into our lives. All those years I spent believing that emotional walls could protect us better than genuine connection." I tilted my head back to look up at him. "You were doing the best you could with the tools you had. You were protecting Ken the only way you knew how." "Maybe," he conceded. "But you showed me there was a better way. You taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, that opening your heart doesn't mean it will inevitably get broken, that love is worth every risk." I shifted positions so I could properly see his face. "You taught me things too, you know. You showed me that people can change, that first impressions aren't always accurate, that sometimes the coldest exterior hides the warmest heart." Skyler smiled, that genuine transformative smile that still took my breath away every time I saw it. "So we rescued each other then." "I suppose we did," I agreed. He leaned down and kissed me softly, a kiss full of promise and commitment and love that didn't need to be spoken aloud, because it was demonstrated in 1,000 small actions every single day. When we broke apart, I noticed Ken standing in the doorway, rubbing his sleepy eyes with one small fist, his favorite stuffed elephant dangling from the other hand. "Did we wake you, sweetheart?" I asked, immediately concerned. Ken shook his head, yawning widely. "I just wanted to make sure you were both still here. Sometimes I wake up and think maybe I dreamed everything, that maybe Jamie isn't really part of our family." My heart clenched painfully. Skyler and I exchanged a meaningful look before I stood and walked over to Ken, scooping him up into my arms even though he was getting bigger every day. "I'm not going anywhere," I promised him, carrying him back to the couch where Skyler made room for both of us. "This is my home now. You and your dad, you're my family, and families stick together no matter what challenges come their way." Ken nestled between us, perfectly content, and within minutes his breathing had evened out as sleep claimed him once again. Skyler reached across our son to take my hand, lacing our fingers together. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything, for being patient with me when I was impossible, for loving Ken so completely, for teaching me how to feel again." I squeezed his hand gently. "Thank you for letting me into your life, into your heart, into this beautiful family. Thank you for taking a chance on me." And as I sat there with Skyler on one side and Ken sleeping peacefully between us, I realized that this exact moment was everything I had ever wanted without knowing I wanted it. A family, a home, a place where I belonged completely. The story of a CEO everyone called Heartless, a lonely little boy who needed love, and an ordinary person who somehow managed to bring them both back to life. Our story, perfect in its imperfection, beautiful in its complexity, and absolutely worth every challenge we had faced to get here.